My beloved child, be still for a heartbeat, because what you are about to hear did not begin with you, it began with someone who believed the past still held the answers. They walked into a quiet place carrying questions they could no longer silence. They wanted certainty. They wanted to know if your heart still belonged to yesterday. But the moment they asked about your love life, the answer they received was nothing like they had imagined. And from that instant forward, something inside them could never return to the way it was. Imagine this for a moment. Someone who once believed they understood your story suddenly realizes there were chapters they never even opened. They expected to hear that your future would forever circle around old memories, familiar emotions, unfinished conversations. Instead, they were confronted with a possibility so unexpected that it forced them to question every assumption they had been holding on to. Pause here, because this is where the path quietly begins to change. What if the greatest surprise is not what they discovered, but what it awakens inside you? The room felt ordinary. The questions did not. As your name entered the conversation, the atmosphere shifted in a way no one could explain with simple words. It was as though every forgotten lesson, every quiet victory, every moment you chose growth over resentment had become visible all at once. Your ex expected to hear about regret. Instead, they heard about transformation. Not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. They realized that while they had been looking backward, your life had been quietly learning how to move forward. Stay a little longer, because this next thought may connect pieces you never knew belonged together. Sometimes the people who leave our story continue watching from a distance, not because they wish to control the future, but because they cannot understand how someone they once knew became someone entirely new. Growth often happens where no applause exists. It happens in ordinary mornings, silent evenings, and decisions nobody else witnesses. By the time others notice, the change has already become permanent. Then came another revelation. The conversation turned away from the past and toward what was waiting ahead. Instead of hearing that your journey had reached its highest point, your ex was told that the most meaningful chapter had not even begun. Imagine carrying the expectation of hearing an ending, only to discover that someone else's beginning is unfolding beyond your sight. That realization can shake even the strongest certainty. Think carefully. How many times have you underestimated yourself simply because someone else once failed to recognize your worth? How many opportunities have you quietly dismissed because old opinions echoed louder than your own inner voice? The answers matter more than you think. Every future is shaped not only by the choices we make today but also by the beliefs we finally decide to leave behind. Wait for this next moment. It changes everything. Your ex wanted details. They wanted timelines. They wanted reassurance that nothing important had changed. But certainty refused to appear. Instead, they heard something unexpected: your future could not be measured by your past anymore. The direction of your life had become impossible to predict using yesterday's patterns. That single realization unsettled every expectation they had carried into the conversation. Notice how life often works. The people who think they know your destination are usually looking at an old map. Meanwhile, you have already stepped onto a road they cannot even see. That is why unexpected opportunities arrive without asking permission. They are drawn toward the version of you that kept growing while nobody was paying attention. Have you ever wondered why some delays eventually become blessings? At first they feel like closed doors. Later, they reveal themselves as careful preparation. Every disappointment teaches discernment. Every setback quietly strengthens vision. Every unanswered question creates space for a wiser answer to appear. None of it feels exciting while you are living through it. Yet when the pieces finally connect, the entire picture begins to make sense. You might miss the turning point if you rush past this thought. Your greatest advantage has never been perfection. It has always been resilience. Every experience you believed was breaking you was also shaping a perspective that could not have been learned any other way. That unseen strength is becoming visible now, not only to you, but even to people who once believed they had already figured you out. The conversation your ex walked into was supposed to give them clarity. Instead, it gave them questions they could not escape. They left wondering whether they had misunderstood your potential from the very beginning. They began replaying old memories through an entirely different lens, noticing moments they had overlooked, words they had ignored, and qualities they had never fully appreciated until they imagined a future where someone else would. Before this chapter closes, hear one more truth. Life has an unusual habit of revealing your value after you stop trying to prove it. The moment you become focused on your own growth instead of seeking validation, everything around you begins to respond differently. Confidence becomes quieter. Wisdom becomes deeper. Peace becomes stronger than approval. And those who once underestimated your journey suddenly find themselves trying to understand the person standing before them now. The story, however, is far from complete. Because what your ex heard next was not about what had already happened. It was about someone whose path is slowly moving toward yours, someone connected to possibilities neither of you could have imagined. That unexpected message is the reason they walked away more unsettled than when they arrived. Wait until the next part, because what they learned about the person approaching your future changes the entire meaning of everything they thought they knew. A new realization is beginning to unfold. And this is the moment where the questions become impossible to ignore. Your ex thought the conversation had already revealed everything worth knowing. They were ready to leave, believing they had gathered every answer they came searching for. But just as they stood to walk away, one final message changed the atmosphere completely. It wasn't louder than the others. It wasn't dramatic. Yet somehow, those few unexpected words carried more weight than everything that had been said before. The message was simple in spirit: your future was no longer centered around what had been lost. It was being shaped by what had quietly been prepared. Imagine hearing that after spending so much time believing the opposite. Imagine realizing that the story you thought was finished had actually become the foundation for something far greater than anyone expected. Pause for a second, because this may connect with your own journey. How often do we mistake silence for nothing happening? We assume that because life feels ordinary, destiny must be standing still. But beneath the surface, unseen moments are always arranging tomorrow. Seeds do not announce themselves while they are growing. They simply continue becoming what they were meant to be until one day everyone notices what was invisible before. That thought lingered in your ex's mind. For the first time, they began to wonder whether they had only known one version of you. The version still learning, still healing, still searching. They had never imagined meeting the future version of you, calmer, wiser, stronger, and guided by a confidence that no longer depended on anyone else's approval. Stay with me just a little longer, because another unexpected layer is about to appear. The conversation turned toward the kind of people who naturally enter a life that has been transformed from within. It wasn't described as luck. It wasn't described as coincidence. It was explained as alignment. When someone grows into greater clarity, they begin attracting conversations, opportunities, and relationships that reflect that same clarity. Your ex had expected to hear your name connected to old emotions. Instead, they heard it connected to possibility. That single difference echoed louder than any prediction ever could. For a quiet moment, they simply sat there, reflecting on every choice, every goodbye, every misunderstanding. Suddenly, they weren't asking, "What happened?" They were asking, "What if I never truly understood who they were becoming?" Think about that. Sometimes people don't recognize your value because they only know your history. They judge today's potential through yesterday's mistakes. But growth has a remarkable way of rewriting first impressions. One decision. One season of perseverance. One unexpected breakthrough. Everything begins looking different. There was another surprising realization. The future ahead of you wasn't described as perfect. It was described as meaningful. There is an important difference. A perfect path teaches very little. A meaningful path shapes character, wisdom, and purpose. The challenges you've faced have not removed your future, they have refined it. Every lesson has quietly prepared you to recognize opportunities that your past self might have overlooked. Before you continue, ask yourself one question. What if every delay you've experienced has been protecting you until you were truly ready for what comes next? That possibility is more powerful than it first appears. The atmosphere grew thoughtful again as the conversation reached its final moments. Your ex realized that answers alone could not change anything. Understanding arrives first, but action always follows later. Whether someone chooses to grow from what they discover is a decision only they can make. Meanwhile, your own story continues moving forward. Not because someone else finally noticed your worth. Not because someone suddenly changed their opinion. But because your direction no longer depends on either of those things. If this message has stirred something inside you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if these stories inspire you to keep believing in your own journey, consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who might need the same reminder today. One final thought before this chapter ends. The greatest surprises rarely arrive with loud announcements. They appear quietly, disguised as ordinary moments. A simple conversation. A chance encounter. A decision made on an average day. Looking back, those small moments often become the turning points that changed everything. But the story still isn't over. Because what your ex discovered after leaving that conversation, and the unexpected sign that crossed their path almost immediately afterward, made them question whether your lives were moving toward one final, unforgettable crossroads. That is where the next chapter begins. Something unexpected happened after they walked away, and this was the part no one could have anticipated. The answers they had just heard refused to stay behind in that quiet room. They echoed with every step, every thought, every memory. What they believed would bring closure had instead opened a door filled with possibilities they had never considered. And for the first time in a long while, certainty gave way to curiosity. Take a moment and imagine this. What if someone spent months believing they understood your story, only to realize they had been reading the wrong chapter all along? What if every conclusion they reached was based on a version of you that no longer existed? That realization alone is enough to change the way a person sees everything. As the day continued, your ex found themselves noticing things they had ignored before. A familiar place suddenly carried a different meaning. An old conversation sounded different in their memory. Even moments they once dismissed as ordinary now seemed to contain lessons they had overlooked. Nothing around them had changed. Yet somehow, everything felt different. Wait here. Because this quiet shift is more important than it first appears. Life has a remarkable way of revealing truth only when someone is finally ready to receive it. Before that moment, the signs are everywhere, but they remain invisible. Then one small realization arrives, and suddenly every experience begins fitting together like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for years. Your journey has been creating those pieces all along. Every challenge taught patience. Every disappointment strengthened perspective. Every unexpected delay quietly redirected your path towards something more meaningful than you could have imagined at the time. Your ex began wondering whether they had mistaken temporary chapters for permanent endings. They thought they understood where your life was headed. But now they realized they had only seen the beginning of a much greater transformation. And here's something worth reflecting on. The people who underestimate your future usually measure it using your past. They assume tomorrow will simply repeat yesterday. But true growth doesn't follow predictable patterns. It surprises everyone, including the person experiencing it. Stay until the final moment, because one final revelation is waiting. The message they heard was never really about romance alone. It was about becoming the kind of person whose future expands because of inner growth. Relationships, opportunities, meaningful friendships, and unexpected breakthroughs all begin responding differently when someone chooses wisdom over fear and hope over regret. That is why your story is still unfolding. Not because fate suddenly changed overnight, but because you kept becoming someone new while life quietly prepared new possibilities around you. As evening approached, your ex carried one question they could not answer. What if their greatest chapter is still ahead, and I only recognized it after it had already begun? That question stayed with them. Perhaps it will stay with you as well. Think carefully. Are you still defining yourself by moments that no longer define you? Are you waiting for someone else's approval before believing in your own future? Or are you ready to step into the version of yourself that has been quietly growing through every lesson, every setback, and every victory? The answer belongs to you alone. Because this story has never been about proving anything to the past. It has always been about preparing for what comes next. And maybe, just maybe, the most extraordinary part of your journey isn't something another person discovers about you. It's the moment you finally discover it for yourself. The future rarely announces its arrival with noise. It often whispers through unexpected moments, gentle reminders, and quiet opportunities. Listen closely. Keep moving forward. Trust the progress that cannot always be seen. Sometimes, the greatest surprise isn't that someone else finally recognizes your value. It's that you no longer need them to. A quiet ending often hides the loudest beginning, so before you close this chapter, listen carefully. The greatest revelation was never meant to stay with your ex. In time, it was always meant to reach you. Days passed, yet the conversation refused to fade from their mind. They replayed every sentence, searching for a different meaning, hoping they had misunderstood. But every reflection brought them back to the same realization: your path had moved beyond the limits of old expectations. That thought unsettled them more than any prediction ever could. For years, they believed your future could be guessed by looking at your past. They assumed the person they once knew would remain unchanged. They never imagined that quiet perseverance could reshape an entire destiny. Now imagine this. What if someone looked at the night sky and believed only a few stars existed, simply because the clouds covered the rest? The stars were always there. The clouds only delayed the view. Your potential has always been like that. Hidden does not mean absent. Unnoticed does not mean unimportant. And delayed never means denied. Pause here for just a moment. Because this may be the sentence someone needed to hear today. The strongest transformations are rarely announced. They happen while the world is distracted. They happen while people stop watching. They happen when nobody is expecting anything extraordinary. That is why your story feels different now. Your ex didn't leave with certainty. They left with respect. Respect for the strength they had failed to recognize. Respect for the future they could no longer predict. And respect for the person you had quietly become. But then, something happened that made them stop in their tracks. Later that evening, while reflecting on everything they had heard, they came across a familiar memory, one they had almost forgotten. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't magical. It was simply a reminder of a moment when you had chosen kindness over pride, patience over frustration, and hope over disappointment. Only now did they understand its importance. They realized those small choices had been shaping your future all along. Think about that. People often wait for one huge event to change their lives. Yet life is usually transformed by hundreds of tiny decisions no one celebrates. One encouraging word. One difficult lesson. One brave step forward. One decision to keep believing when giving up would have been easier. Those moments become the foundation of an extraordinary future. Stay a little longer. Because this final thought may stay with you long after this video ends. Your journey has never been a competition with your past. It has never been about proving someone wrong. It has always been about becoming someone your future can trust. And when that happens, unexpected doors begin opening. New conversations arrive. New opportunities appear. New people recognize qualities that others once overlooked. Not because you changed overnight, but because your consistency finally became visible. If this story has brought even one spark of hope into your heart, I'd truly love to see your thoughts in the comments. And if you've enjoyed walking through this journey with me, subscribing and sharing this video helps these messages reach others who may need them at exactly the right moment. Now, before we part, hear this final whisper. Your ex searched for answers about your love life. But the greatest answer was never about who would walk beside you. It was about the person you were becoming. Because when your character grows, your future grows with it. And somewhere beyond today's horizon, a chapter is already preparing itself, one that doesn't ask you to return to who you were, but invites you to step fully into who you are meant to become. When that chapter finally opens, everything that once seemed confusing will suddenly make perfect sense.